The heroine lies on the pavement covered in blood, suffering badly from internal wounds, regretting not bringing the stone sooner. Klein Redolovsko von Macarena, with lovely facial features and blonde hair, plays the role of the daughter, transforming completely. Pensively, she looks away, her fan covering her face as she realizes that everything around her is just a disguise. In an opulent room decorated with carpets and chandeliers, Klein has a sense of wealth, though luxury does not bring joy. Standing there in her beautiful dress, she looks lonely as she ponders the millions of thoughts that are flashing through her head. Klein's displeasure is evident in the corset she had to wear while changing her look for the role. The crystal shoe presses hard against my foot, rubbing my toes and reminding me that luxury requires sacrifice. Running out of the hall, Klein used to leave, leaving the maid confused. Far from the hall, she promises herself that this is the last time she'll run away, determined not to succumb to any more discomfort. The prince kisses the hand of a beautiful girl at a royal ball, but she only responds with a smile, knowing that this is the beginning of a new chapter in her life. The engagement was scheduled well ahead of the ball, so the ring glistened on her finger as if happy to finally be in the long-awaited spot. It wasn't the first time the prince had been in the count's castle. This place had managed to become very familiar and even a little native to him. Each time, the young man was very happy to attend all sorts of events without even realizing Klein and her crush. The red-haired beauty fell in love with the prince at first sight. And so, being in the audience in a crowd of people, the heroine, as usual, waves her favorite fan around and waits for the announcement. It took 10 years to accomplish what was envisioned. The prince is in the audience, also waiting for the moment when he announces the upcoming events. His lineage had always been on the side of royalty, and that was why everything suited him. Looking a little flustered, the young man holding the decree paper in his hands begins his speech. Engagement to be. Clenching her hand into a fist with excitement and joy, the girl thinks only of the fact that everything has finally worked out. Her hand is in her pocket, which helps hide her emotions. Lady Klein accepts congratulations. Lots of comments about how good they look together are flying in from all directions. She can only remain silent, covering her eyes in gratitude. You can see the pretense on the faces of those around her. They did not expect this turn of events, or it is simple envy. No one knows. The girl stands in the crowd like a white crow. Everyone's only looking at her. In her thoughts, the heroine is already singing praises to herself because she was the one who played a major role in the execution of this plan. She doesn't care about the people around her. People are whispering amongst themselves. By now, everyone knows what follows the event that happened today. At the end of the ball, the agreement will be approved. The red-haired girl anticipates the completion of these 10 years of waiting. She'd had to pretend for so long, and finally, it would all be over. The decision to celebrate the last night comes immediately. Folding the fan, the heroine decides to shift. Thoughts of what to reward herself with today never leave her. She doesn't know what will happen next, but she promises herself that no matter how it goes, she'll give it her best shot. In the next moment, the girl starts looking at everyone around her, her attention not focused on anyone in particular. But that's a lie. The ball has just started, and she has to choose someone to dance with. The hall is full of people. Everyone in attendance can choose who they want to dance with. There is an immeasurably great number of beautifully dressed young men and ladies here. Displeasure flashes across the young Klein's face. She remembers that etiquette dictates that the prince should be the first to ask her to dance. The guy is literally a few meters away from her, but she doesn't even want to get close to him. The blonde man's face shows how cold-blooded he is. You can tell right away that the young man is not eager to approach the girl either, staying where he is and glaring at her. The lady is faced with a difficult choice. She must decide whether she should dance first with Count Macarena or the heir to some stately family. Klein Redolovsko von Macarena gracefully leaves the prince's company, deciding to push him to the very end of the ball and leaving him behind. It's better for everyone. Stopped in thought, the girl doesn't know where she should go. Her attention is drawn to someone unexpected. Klein turns his head toward the stranger. There's no emotion on her face, but you can tell that she immediately realized who it was and why he was here. A stately, handsome, black-haired young man stands directly across from our heroine. Putting his hands in his pockets, he continues to stare at her intently, almost burning her with an indifferent gaze. A second of confusion, and both feel an undercurrent of anger. The girl recognizes none other than Duke Beckeld. She is not pleased with this meeting. Squeezing out a cute smile, the lady starts asking what he wants. Assuming he's not lost, she suggests he go sit somewhere in the corner rather than stand in the middle of the hall idly. The young man is indeed extremely handsome, but he's famous for far more than just his looks. Lasien Frate Jacques von Beckeld is the head of the only ducal family in the Empire of Pala. He saved hundreds of nobles and heads the imperial chamber. The Duke looks at the girl with a hard stare. Moving closer to be near the girl, he wanted to say something but stepped on the hem of his interlocutor's dress. Remaining still as unperturbed, he tries to ignore her anger. The lady does force herself to smile, though, as if nothing is wrong. He's causing a lot of trouble. In the past, he had gotten in the way every time, and thus prevented her from getting closer to the prince. It was because of this man that Count Macarena found it so difficult to carry out his plan. He always keeps out of sight, but remains just as annoying to everyone. The beauty seemed to be in complete tranquility. Something had clearly occurred to her. Another thought that would help her. The prince doesn't realize what's going on. Calmly standing aside from all the events, he thought of various things, but his calmness ended. Klain moves across the room toward the young man with confidence. The closer she gets, the more the confusion shows on his face. It seems like it's just this couple right now. Crouching in curtsy and bowing her head, the girl asks with a sweet smile if the guy would like to ask her to dance. She insists. The prince's face pales. He clearly didn't expect this. Belle knows that Duke Beckeld is watching them, which is why she is not surprised by this reaction. The determination hasn't evaporated anywhere, and here the young couple are already holding hands in anticipation of the dance. Klain has incredible feelings because she really enjoys bullying people of the upper class. The two of them look very harmonious. The young man gently holds the girl by the waist, and she, in turn, placed her hands on his shoulders. Everything is fine, but the prince is definitely not enjoying what's going on. The dark-haired Duke watches from the other end of the hall with a note of envy or disappointment. He had expected a completely different outcome, and had not at all expected the redhead to have the courage and spirit to do so. Whirling in a dance in complete silence, the prince suddenly begins a story about how the girl will get nothing with him and will suffer if she marries him. The protagonist snuggles her face against his shoulder. She is not at all pleased by his words. She's not satisfied that he'll never love her. She believes there will be both love and meaning in their lives. But the young man thinks quite differently. Literally every cell in her body doesn't want to believe the words spoken. It really hurts to hear him say all that. Just because he was lucky enough to be born a prince doesn't mean he's already good at life. It is considered as a threat to one's own bride, and it is hard to dare to do such a thing. After gathering her thoughts, the heroine smiles, pretending that nothing happened and talking about how everything is fine and it's normal. The young man, not expecting to hear such an answer, was at first even confused. He asks if she's okay with this arrangement, expecting to hear a refusal. The young girl only nods in response, indicating that everything is fine. She seems happy, but it's hard to stay okay with that kind of arrangement. By pointing out that it's none of her business, it all makes sense. It's the middle of the night. All the inhabitants have gone to bed and the castle is empty. The door to the street opens quietly. Finding complete silence, Klain thinks about how glad she is that the ball is finally over and she can reincarnate into her other self. The girl's cloak is developing in the wind. She's standing on the terrace. The blonde is free from her role, and now it's time to change things dramatically in her favor. Somewhere behind Klain, suspicious rustlings were heard. Not expecting this and clearly frightened, the lady doesn't even have time to react thickly enough to defend herself. The hood falls off with a sharp jerk to the side. Her wrist is wrapped around someone else's strong arm. She'll probably be left with a bruise and a lot of other physical problems afterward. Genuine terror looms on the blonde heroine's face. She seems ready to scream with helplessness. A strange sound comes out of her throat. The lady lies on the cold tile. She's covered in blood. The only thing she feels is intense pain. She doesn't want to die, but the thought that this is how it's going to happen pops into her head. The nobles couldn't let her escape. A tall man with a cold-blooded expression, none other than Count Macarena. He couldn't let her get away alive, after all. She was just a pawn that had been raised as a villainess to inspire fear. Trying to deal with the unbearable pain, the heroine opens her mouth with something in it. She had to place her fingers inside to extract the object, which entailed more pain. A small, inconspicuous glass bottle. It's not the packaging that matters, but the filling itself, because inside is a purple potion that carries a huge role. The young heroine was preparing this remedy as her last chance. By opening the lid, time is turned back. A magical remedy will help her escape, go back and live happily ever after without any problems. She has no choice but to use the can. Klain attended wizarding events quite often. Everyone always laughed at their theories, but not our heroine. She pretended not to believe it all, but secretly helped with the research. Now, lying on the pavement and looking at the vial, she didn't regret what she had done one bit. Everything is exactly as it should be, but all she's gotten isn't enough for one sip. Realizing she had no time left and deciding to take action, Klain finally brought the jar to her lips and drank the potion. It's not the most pleasant flavor. Tears flowed from the blonde beauty's eyes, whether from the pain or the discomfort. A nervous laugh of victory burst from the protagonist's chest. Smiling, all she could think about was how everything would be fine when she went back in time, covering her mouth with her hand. Black, all-consuming darkness. The girl is still lying on the concrete floor. She promises herself that she will definitely survive at all costs. The table is full of dirty dishes and leftovers. It just seems like an unfathomable amount. All of this is clearly off the street, and it's hard to see what's what. A dark blonde woman stands right next to the kitchen furniture. Holding 2 pints of beer, which appear to be empty, she calls out to Karuna to help with the cleanup. The blonde-haired girl, holding the plates in her hands, agrees because she is obligated to help Mistress Jessie. Things are going great, but she didn't expect to go back so far in time. Trying to hold on to a stack of plates, Karuna is carried across the room. There is quite a lot to take care of today, and she only hopes she has time to complete all the tasks. As she passed one of the tables, a man in a blue shirt called out to the girl. He didn't give her name, but she knew for sure he was addressing her. The heroine only had time to turn around before she saw the outstretched piece of bun. The young man can't understand why she's not growing up in any way, and jokingly says he doubts she's even being fed there. The girl doesn't hesitate to dig into the offered food. She's clearly hungry, which is why she never turns something down. The girl is not starving. The supervisor always gives a lot of rice for serving people. The young men only smile back, listening intently as the supervisor yells again over Karuna eating the food. Already about to leave, the beauty invites her acquaintances to visit this place more often. She'll be very pleased, and that might help. Darkness descended upon the land. As if trying to absorb everything around, the beautiful sunset as a harbinger sparkles with pink tones. The standing house is getting ready for bed. Stretching and kneading her arms, Karuna complains to herself about how tired she is. She'd done a lot of work today, and knew full well that she wasn't going to feel very well by this evening. Stretching and kneading her arms, Karuna complains to herself about how tired she is. She'd done a lot of work today, and knew full well that she wasn't going to feel very well by this evening. The next moment, the girl falls back on the bed with relief. By doing this each time, it was as if she was letting go of the day that had passed and enjoying herself. Looking a little sad, the protagonist reflects on all that has happened. Such thoughts overtake her every night, and it's been 5. The girl survived. Opening her eyes, her surprise was unparalleled, because even with hope, she wasn't sure of anything at all. Rising from the ground and shaking off her cloak, her first thought was that she had survived. It was impossible to say that she wasn't overjoyed by it. It brings back memories from last night in that alley. Lowering her eyes to her clothes, lifting the hem of her dress, she quickly catches herself. We can't stand still, or they might come for her body, and then she's definitely finished. There was a puddle underfoot, a beautiful shade of blue, and so transparent it felt like a mirror. Without noticing right away, the girl stepped right into it, and she was drawn to look into it. The heroine was being stared at by her reflection, a beautiful, sweet girl with short hair. Her expression froze in incomprehension. Quickly bouncing away, the girl began to question herself in deep surprise. She really didn't understand who it was at all or where it came from. Be that as it may, the heroine got used to her new self pretty quick. The potion bottle was the culprit. It held no value now, but when she needed help, this potion did take her back 8 years. By all calculations, it should now be year 481 of the imperial calendar. The streets look exactly the same as they did recently, which is back then, she was still Klain, a red-haired beauty always dressed in cute outfits. Perhaps no one had realized yet that she had escaped from the castle, but the certainty was present that as soon as the maids caught up with her, things would be bad. The faces displayed a multitude of emotions. One of them was fear. Thoughts of Count Macarena popped into my head. The girl was sure he was deciding to shift. The heroine was still haunted by the same terrible thoughts. But there was only the castle looks exactly the same as it always has. Years go by, nothing changes. That's why even now, back 8 years, the lady doesn't notice anything. Karuna is handed a warm sandwich with greens and meat. This looks incredibly delicious. The girl looks a little lost and helpless. After accepting the food, she only quietly says words of thanks and begins to eat. Being right here, it's hard for a lady not to think of the prince. She was pulled out of her own thoughts by the atmosphere around her. Everyone around them looked rather. It was not desirable to bother thinking, which is why the heroine turned to a passing girl. The blonde didn't hesitate to answer and revealed that the prince himself had been cruelly deceived yesterday. Only opening her mouth in surprise, she kept asking how it happened. Looking worried on the outside, in her head she mocked his knack for getting into trouble since he was a child. That was a truth she certainly hadn't expected. The prince was deceived by the count's daughter Macarena, running away right before the engagement without saying anything. The girl's face froze in confusion. With her head down, the protagonist tried to put the pieces of the puzzle together, while her interlocutor looked at her in silence, frozen in a mute. The blonde seemed ready to cry again, but then a guy walking by noticed them and stopped. A handsome young man with lavender-colored hair tried to find out what was wrong. No one realized what had happened. The girl only told about the story and how Karuna must be shocked by such a thing. The heroine's eyes widened. She kept thinking about everything that had happened. This can't be happening. It's all definitely some kind of evil joke or accident. Noticing the sadness in Karuna's eyes, the young man squatted down, reassuring her, telling her that there was nothing to fear, and the evil bride was being punished and would not be able to return. A tear rolled down the protagonist's face. Prince will definitely have time to call off the engagement by the time she returns. If the prince were to marry Klain after all, then he would really be in trouble. It's impossible to imagine what he's going through right now. The girl decided to stop thinking about anything. What was. She can't change anything. She's just left with no choice. Now she has 1 more month to work. The ceiling caught her attention. Plain wooden planks that one wanted to stare at out of simple hopelessness. Karuna really needed the money. She found this job and has been saving steadily from her paycheck to fulfill her goal. The girl managed to get a sufficient amount of money, but all to no avail. All her money had been stolen in an assassination attempt, which was not to be expected. It's not pleasant to remember something like that. Always makes me feel sad and wistful. Being in a hopeless situation, once again she decided not to think about it. At least not right. There is an upside to everything. The heroine didn't die and even stayed in the present, even though she looks 8 years younger. She should keep moving. It had been a beautiful morning, except for the fact that Karuna hadn't gotten much sleep. As she descended the stairs, the cute couple smilingly answered the question and, after saying goodbye, informed the girl that breakfast was already waiting for her in the kitchen. Left all alone and waving goodbye, the beauty remembered her work as well. She has to move out for work very soon. The walls of the cafe shook with screams. Karuna protested as best she could, already knowing that the chief, bowing his head in surprise, calmly interjected, "Why on earth wouldn't—" At Duke Manor, it almost always felt like people wanted to destroy you literally with their stares. The cold tentacles of fear. The girl's normally calm face was distorted by obvious rage. The Emperor is eager to get his hands on her, but he can't. She didn't want to be destroyed. The older man, bowing his head slightly, spoke judgmentally about how she wasn't that smart after all beyond her years. He had been wrong, and now it was clear. The refusal was the last straw. It seemed the chief's favorite pastime was to incite the young girl. She wasn't scared at all, but the man thought otherwise, trying to get her to agree. Jerking to the side, Karuna screamed again. "Who the hell does he think he is?" None of this is true. Trying to remain calm, she even thought she was almost succeeding, but her gooseflesh gave away the truth. The unpleasant conversation had frayed the girl's nerves enough. Heading for the exit, she decided she was going to take today off or things would only get worse. Already on her way out, the chief's words about a second later, standing near the counter, she was nodding her head vigorously, agreeing to go anywhere. She just needs directions. She's up for anything. The carriage drove along the city's cobblestones. The wheels made loud noises, eager to pop off. The unpleasant Karuna was deep in her thoughts. It was really scary. At her own risk, she agreed to this trip. The only thing that comforted her was the fact that she looked younger, and probably no one would double pay today, and that's the happiest news of all. Far more important than her fears or the threat of her identity being revealed. The girl only cared about money. The chariot moved closer and closer to the castle gates. It was hard not to notice the horses in harness when there were just identical houses all around. The girl was about to open her mouth, but froze in mute question. She was preceded by a young man who disappeared from her. Karuna decided not to sit and wait in one place, but to go straight down to the ground. Jumping off the seat was no trouble at all for her. Light leather boots cushioned the jump, and now the heroine is firmly on the surface. It was the right decision to come here, and the girl regrets nothing. Turning wrongly, the heroine hit the corner of the chariot with her shoulder. The pain reflected on her face, and she automatically put her hand to the bruised spot. The girl accidentally noticed her hairpin was missing, which had probably fallen off due to her clumsiness. Before she could begin to panic, the blonde beauty's attention seemed to be chained to the ground. Right under the wheels of the vehicle lay her jewelry. The pain was barely felt anymore, and that was why Karuna decided to bend over and try to get the ill-fated hairpin. Squatting down, she was about to put her attempts into action, but suddenly she felt danger with her back, eyes rounded with fear. Slowly raising her head, the beauty froze. Her entire body seemed to turn into a block of ice in an instant. Excitement prevailed and crowded out all common sense. Right in front of the girl towered a wolf of incredibly huge size. It was clearly larger than the chariot, and certainly larger than Karuna herself. Red eyes flashed with an unkind fire, not boding. The protagonist involuntarily fell to the ground. She didn't know what to expect. The beast continued to stare at one point without taking his eyes off. Raising her head and continuing to stare at the wolf, Karuna tried to calm herself. Convincing her that she couldn't die from such a beast didn't help at all. After the Count's assassination attempt, the girl simply cannot. Black, massive claws glistened in the sun, calling to mind the end of life. Seeing such a thing in front of you, it's pretty hard not to cry from hopelessness. Thoughts of the worst were creeping up more and more from all sides. Even if the wolf just steps on the girl, she's finished. At first glance, any conclusions instantly evaporated as soon as the animal raised a paw. The beast wanted to take a step forward or backward, but it seemed to be doing so to run over the poor girl. In the next second, Karuna screamed in a voice not her own in an attempt to ward off the animal. She didn't want to die, because she still had so much to do. Covering her face with her hands in a protective gesture, the girl pressed her. It seemed like an eternity had passed, but nothing happened. It couldn't help but cause confusion. Is it already dead? Or has it just been left for later? Opening her eyes, the beast looked sad. It seemed as if they had switched roles and all the fear had gone to him. With his ears pressed to his head, it was only worth turning her head, and the girl notices something behind her. Right in her hand, she sees a knife out of the corner of her eye. Karuna looks off into the distance. Her attention is drawn to a pile of barrels tied together with ropes. It's for safety, and it will help her a lot. You can see that the barrels are holding their own. Even a light breeze sways them quietly in the wind. It will benefit and help the cause. We need to think about exactly how to throw the knife. The protagonist decides to take action. Grasping the handle of the knife with her hand, she knows exactly what she needs to do and in what sequence. There's no time at all. We have to move fast. In the next second, the weapon swiftly flew towards the formation and cut one of the ropes, which was the most important one in this structure. A victorious smile appears on the girl's face with a dose of relief. Mission accomplished, so all she can do is think about how easy it was. Lady is the Empire's best villain. The task was very simple. The barrels begin to fall one by one, as if in slow motion. Quite a sight for a girl to see. The wolf's mouth opens and he begins to howl. Nothing has happened yet, but the animal sees everything that is happening and understands everything perfectly. Lots of weighty barrels flying straight toward the predator. Trying to hide his fright, the beast only stares at them, unable to do anything. Karuna can finally breathe easy. Grinning viciously, she triumphs. The worst is over. The most important thing now is to escape. It is urgent to move, but the girl catches herself thinking that she can't do it. Sharp sounds get the lady's attention. A cry for help was not at all what she expected to hear. After a few seconds, someone's head is shown somewhere from underneath the barrels. Blue hair glistens in the sun. After a few seconds, someone's head is shown somewhere from underneath the barrels. Blue hair glistens in the sun. Quickly turning around but unable to get up, the girl crawls to the side. Now, pressing her hands to her head and catching herself thinking that this is the end, the heroine still screams as if to warn you not to approach her. The barrels shift, and a ragged young man emerges from beneath them. Putting a hand to his head, he looks exhausted after the incident. Not believing her eyes, the young lady takes her hands away from her face and questions herself. It's not a wolf, and it relaxes the mind considerably. Duke Bakeled. It was none other than him. The relaxation passed quickly. The young man, as if nothing had happened, fixes his hair and looks away in embarrassment. The girl's consciousness throws up a picture of the guy from their last encounter. Not believing, one only has to look closely, and you can see that it is different from its usual self. The heroine fails to pinpoint exactly what's wrong. Karuna takes note of how different he is from himself, like an abandoned puppy or a wolf cub in the cold. It's hard for her not to admit that he looks cute. Without thinking for long, Duke approaches the girl. Their faces are only a dozen. The girl quickly recoiled with wild squeals. Settling even more onto the pavement, she wondered how spontaneous this move was. The young man carefully tucked the young lady's hair behind her ear. The gesture was filled with warmth, as were his words. Without removing his hand from where it rested, Bakeld asked questions about whether she knew him. The answer was quite strange to him, but Karuna could only mumble something quietly. All the words just slipped. Realizing that he had already figured out who she was, the beauty decided that it was urgent to figure out how to get out of the situation. The thought that she might be granted protection in return for information about Count Macarena passed quickly like an arrow. With a jerk of her head to the side, thus dropping the other's hand, Lady Karuna stared hostilely at her interlocutor. She doesn't have to die. The Duke continues to glare at her. What does he want with a poor girl? It's impossible to read anything at all in his eyes. He remains just as cold. In a split second, his face changed. Somewhere the stony expression disappeared and was replaced by a sweet. Covering her mouth with her palms, Karuna yells again in an attempt to protest. She's definitely not his soulmate, and she doesn't know anyone like that. Everything seemed unreal because Bakeld, covering his eyes, elegantly kisses the hand of the beauty. The girl is so surprised that she can't utter a word. The only thoughts running through his head, this can't be true. It's all madness covered in lies. My eyes seem to open even more on their own. Pulling away from my lady's hand, the dark-haired man stiffens in silence. He's clearly not going to move away or take any action. Without thinking long, the boy closed his eyes again and bowed his head in acknowledgement and respect. Karuna continued to stare at him. Abruptly embracing the maiden, the Duke fell her to the ground, crushing her with his weight. He was quite comfortable and liked his position. Snuggling into the blonde's pleasant-smelling hair, Bakeld stopped moving. There was no... The next minute, the man fell on his side, still not letting go of the protagonist and making strange noises. He seemed to be falling asleep, so Karuna didn't realize anything. The strange actions were throwing her into a stupor. Trying to slip her hand through to throw him off didn't end well, no matter how much the maiden... From the outside, it all looked pretty weird. Waving her legs and arms in the air in an attempt to free herself, the beauty grew increasingly desperate. Hope was lost. Karuna fell silent and stared mindlessly at the sky. The girl really didn't understand what had happened and what she should do now. Out of nowhere, someone's head appeared in front of my eyes. A handsome boy with hair the color of spring leaves was smiling, greeting his interlocutor. Is it really the clan of the forest? The clan has its origins in the original forest. This place belongs to absolutely no one and is where the Pala Empire is located. All the people in the clan look like magical forest fairies of Out of her thoughts, Karuna snapped out of her own. She really wanted to know how the Duke was connected to the clan. One of the girls who had discovered the young lady was, as if nothing had... A blonde girl calls out to a guy asking for help. Calling Bakeld a pervert, she insists on being... The green-haired man cries out in surprise. He can't be a pervert. All he has to do is come to the rescue. Continuing to stare at her interlocutor, Karuna continues to remain quiet without saying a word. The handsome man says that help is on its way. You just have to wait a little longer. The completely free protagonist rolls over and crawls away with a ragged breath. The men of the clan surrounded Bakeld. She spotted them immediately because of their red cloaks and colorful hairstyles. They all seemed to be in a state of confusion. Perhaps the clan is asking. Karuna, with her knees tucked under her, continues to watch the scene. Turning her green eyes aside, the girl is even more unaware of everything that is happening. The wolf couldn't just disappear, but by the minute that version wasn't so delusional. Snapping out of her musings and back into the real world, the protagonist remembers another of her unfulfilled tasks. A hand reaches for the cloak of one of the clansmen and tugs gently at the scarlet fabric. The girl really needs to sign off on the delivery. That's what she came here for, the original purpose. Asking about the possibility of realizing her intentions, she only gets a kind smile in return, which silently shows agreement. Pleased with this arrangement, the young lady is finally relieved. Long overdue to finish this job and go home. After a while, everyone is in the castle. Karuna had to wait for a while, and only asking what they wanted from her, the maiden involuntarily noticed the young man's face contorted in a grimace of feigned surprise. The replica of a nobleman's order being obeyed without further question. Apparently, the forest clan's man wasn't too aware of life outside the forest. That meant only one thing. There was a chance. The lies flowed continuously from the girl's mouth. She wasn't under the protection of the prince himself. Her entourage wouldn't notice her missing, and the Duke would have no problem for keeping some. Already anticipating victory and escape from this horrible place, a nasty grin flashed on the heroine's face, which was hard to see, but it was quite real. She continued the intimidation. The pretense pulled a light plume. This time a green-haired young man comes into play. While agreeing with everything, it was clear that it was pure sarcasm. The girl, almost on her knees, folds her hands in a gesture of supplication, claiming she saw and heard nothing. Miss Absolute Innocence. The most hateful line came out of the interlocutor's mouth. No one was going to let her go. She had seen Ran's transformation, and there was no erasing that from her memory. Settling down on the couch, Karuna, in amazement, interjects what it is. The answer to her mute question. Remembering the man's beauty and how cold he is, the maiden's hair stands up. How come she had become the Duke's soulmate, and what was still worth doing to escape from this place? There is a murderous silence in one of the castle halls. Just two living souls who can't understand each other. The girl interrupts the piece by starting to tell her speculation. The young lady's eyes read weariness. Everything that had happened today had clearly affected her. It's not even news anymore that people from the clan can reincarnate and only fall in love once in their entire lives. The man continues to remain silent. He only bestows a smile on the girl in response. Ideas that beg for their own arguments continue to fill the entire. Once a member of the forest finds true love, he or she manages to know incredible happiness, 100% sure that Ron will cherish every day by his beloved's side. The young man wanted to give some more details on this subject but stopped himself. He couldn't be sure because he said he had never experienced such a thing before, so he couldn't say for sure. The story continues, and it turns out that Ron has been suffering in search of his soulmate since his childhood. The only outlet was a visit to the Imperial Palace. Karuna's eyes rounded sharply. Terror seemed to dominate all her emotions again. My head, as luck would have it, threw up just the right memories for the occasion. The Duke was indeed present. You could never tell from him that he was enjoying himself in the slightest. While in the castle, he constantly glared angrily at everyone without giving any sign. Memories broke off like a thin thread. The young lady still had no way of knowing how this happened. Was he just in search of his soulmate, not there to mock her? The man put a hand to his cheek, eliciting sympathy. His story took a different direction that Karuna didn't even know about. Ron's condition has deteriorated over the past 5 months. He was unable. The girl thought that the boy would cry, but he suddenly opened his eyes and began to smile. It must not be so bad now. With a note of kindness, the young man asked another question. He wondered why the young villainess didn't escape through the passageways behind. It would have made sense, but the girl hadn't even considered it, and now came a moment of self-pity. Wrinkling her nose, the damsel realized the bitterness of the situation audibly. She will have to marry the Duke if this is all true, and she is his. If she doesn't, she's not getting out of here. It is already a commitment and cannot be avoided. It loomed over her like a black cloud. Karuna continues to vehemently deny what is going on in her own head. She's not his soulmate, or she would have known that by now, like 5 years ago. It must be Klain, for at balls the Duke always saw only the red-haired beauty. The cute clan guy continues to smile silently. As much as she wants to run away, the problem is that this guy has told her all of Bakeld's secrets. Staring at the door like an impossible dream, the girl lamented. It wasn't clear to her why the forest native would do such a thing. The protagonist, head down and gaze downcast, was ready to almost cry. Suddenly, the young man suggested that she take a smile stretched across the handsome face. Everything was wonderful, and it was immediately clear that this arrangement suited the green-haired man. Walking away from the hall, Karuna decided not to waste another minute and started screaming again, trying to blame everyone and everything. She's being pushed into a rash act, but no one cared. Being out of sight and hearing of the young lady, the clan native took stock of just how intelligent a child she was. She shouldn't have been left alone, and that's exactly what the man told his subordinates. Listening intently and heeding the words of the chief, the rest of those present agreed with everything. They'd obviously be better off not standing around her in a crowd, so the best solution was to spread out around the neighborhood. The door to the chambers slowly opens. The lights are dimmed, making it clear that no guests were expected today. A hoarse voice asked. The Duke, sitting up in bed, put his hand to his head, trying to escape the sudden light and a hand reaches for the scarlet curtains, and the next moment the sun pours into the room. Turning his head, the young man merely inquires about his well-being. This is the most important thing now. Trying to open his scarlet eyes, Bakeld slowly removes his hands from his face. The green-haired man hurriedly offered a glass of water to his companion. Water was definitely supposed to help with the clouding and thirst. Everything seemed to go back to normal. Taking a sip of water and looking up, he thought about everything that was going on. When he finally lost control was not clear. That line was not a question. Being in this state, Ron is clearly not helping himself or those around him. Deciding to relax a bit, he goes on to say that he only remembers how he thinks he found his soul. Prompted, Clan Lisa nods in agreement, assuring her that she is an extremely nice person. Sounds convincing if it weren't for the next sentence. The girl is only 12 years old. The water's stuck in his lungs. Choking up, the Duke begins to cough incessantly, not believing his ears. Everything seems unreal, but the green-haired young man just keeps smiling sweetly, dilated pupils running one way and another. Words of disbelief escaped the young lad's lips. At the moment, there is only an enveloping sense of terror and confusion all around. Re-asking if she is really 12 years old, Ron feels a cold sweat. He no longer tries to deny it, but with his head bowed, just thinking about how he should be. The girl is not 22, 32, or even 42. It seemed that the man was already agreeable even to a lady of advanced years. Emerging from his mind, which had definitely managed to crackle, Bakeld only begins his questioning again for the 100th time. Turning sharply toward the door, the interlocutor offers to look at the soulmate. The green-haired young man realized that enough time had... The dark-haired man, for his part, was clearly not going anywhere. Without even moving, he continued to glare at the opposite wall. However, as if to hurry him along, the outlier calls out to him repeatedly. Turning his head away, the kid agrees. There was a clear dislike in his words, even though he hadn't even seen the girl in person yet. Dressed in a beautiful black suit, the Duke silently marches behind the clan of the forest. He could have said nothing at all, but as he approached the door, he suddenly and abruptly expressed a desire to enter first. Squinted eyes, squared shoulders, shaking hand made it clear that the nervousness hadn't gone anywhere. A hand gripped the handle of the ornate door. The thoughts ran like that, not even managing to last a minute. The protagonist heard some sounds. Instantly raising her head, she tried to comprehend what was about to happen. Belle, holding a mug of tea in her hands, darted her green eyes. She was really scared, but at the same time she realized that everything was going to be okay. Confusion was displayed on the young Duke's face. He remained completely silent, but even without words you could see all his emotions. His first impression of the girl put him in a stupor. He talked about how she really is a child, thus showing his displeasure. Dumbfounded by such insolence, Karuna was only silently angry. The greeting was less than cordial. A certain rudeness was present. In the next second, the girl put on a cute smile. She couldn't miss the opportunity to tease the guy, so she greeted him, hinting at his proclivities. It felt like the air in the room was electrified. The two heroes glared angrily at each other. They're clearly worth each other. Beautiful sofas softened the ambiance. The young villainess continued to stare silently at her interlocutor, as if oblivious to the third member of the group. The young man was trying very hard to diffuse the conversation, but so far he was having little success. Karuna was not stupid. She always knew how to capitalize on anything that moved in absolutely any situation, deciding that since she couldn't escape the confinement, it was worth taking advantage of it. The castle was safe. The maiden wasn't sure, but perhaps she was. Reluctantly, the house went into the prince's submission by comparison. Determination poured over the edge. The belligerent look made it clear that the villainess was up to something. She can always find escape routes. She just has to wait for their... The lady was about to continue sinking further into her thoughts, but she was interrupted. The forest clan made their presence known. Quickly grouping herself, rejoicing, the chieftain praised Karuna's choice, while turning his head towards Duke to ask his opinion. He was sure the pretty girl had taken a liking to Bakald. The boy listened carefully to his feelings. The worst part was that he understood nothing and felt no attraction. Confusion was displayed on the face of the interlocutor. It was very strange. Just today everything was fine, and now it's changed. They had no choice. The girl listened intently to the conversation. The words that things didn't go as expected brought her back down to earth. Looks like she's not his soulmate after all. Deciding to change the subject, she began to ask what she was allowed to do. This was a really important detail, and the chief was in complete... There were plenty of offers. The guy realized long ago that the lady was familiar with the teacher. The words she heard stunned the girl. Clearly not expecting this, she dropped the food she was diligently eating. Karuna interjected, not believing her ears. The shock took complete possession of her. This job seemed... The Duke made his presence known with another nasty remark. He didn't like the girl's hands, and talked about how difficult it would be for her to handle the sword. Bakald's remarks made the chief a little embarrassed, but at the same time he tried to find any excuse he could. Waving his hands, he addressed either his interlocutors or himself. If proper nutrition is prescribed, the gal can grow old. Mixed thoughts swarmed in his head. One was worse than the other, but the damsel only continued to remain silent. The offer was quite interesting, staying safe and becoming a temple knight. Once she gets older, things will be much better. It seemed as if the answer was about to burst out into the open. Thoughtfulness was saving the situation, but how she wanted to know more details. Determined to take some action at least, the girl exhaled and voiced her protest. She was not agreeable to this arrangement. Not expecting to hear a refusal, the clan forest native only quietly asked if she was sure. A slight shock lit up his face. It was worth considering the words he said. The girl would have no trouble escaping from here if she agreed. Leaning back on the back of the sofa, the lady's face contorted in a distressed grimace. The interlocutors only asked questions in silence, not understanding what the problem was. She can't trust these two individuals. It's written all over their faces what they're going to do to her. The villainess couldn't imagine herself alongside the Knights of the Crown, who were one of the 3 pillars of the Empire. My thoughts focused only on the red cloaks. How fortunate they all are to be under the command of Duke Bockhold himself. The news would literally break if everyone found out that a commoner would be joining. The tears were almost rolling from the young girl's eyes. She couldn't believe what she was saying, but she herself had to give up luxuries because of her problems. Putting his hand to his cheek in a gesture of sympathy and incomprehension, the chief was at a loss for anything to offer. He only asked quietly what she wanted then. A girl expresses a desire to be a maid. This was a cause for general surprise, but it is the safest type of activity. The girl continued to stare at her interlocutors, trying to understand why she was being discouraged. They were only concerned about her condition, as the work is quite grueling. But the blonde interrupted them, saying that she somehow exhaling with hopelessness. The green-haired man only nodded his head in agreement, indicating that he believed her. An elderly woman appears before the heroine. Nice uniform, hair tied back in a neat ponytail and round glasses. Taking a step forward, she tilts her head in a bow. The chief says it's the head maid. A piece of paper was passed into the girl's hands. The gray-haired maid noticed that the blonde was in thought, clearly not understanding what it was, and said that this paper outlined the terms and payment for the job. Still standing next to the couch, the woman continued her story. Karuna directed her gaze somewhere. Bowing her head, the lady began to whisper something in the young lady's ear. The girl's eyes began to slowly round. Shock slowly builds on the damsel's face. She hadn't expected to hear what she had just been told. Goggling her eyes out, the girl stared at the Duke. He seemed to be a saint because the amount was 20 times what she was paid at the inn. That could solve all the problems. Bockhold and the head maid looked at each other in silence. The reaction was indeed funny and put everyone present in a slight stupor. Belle silently continues to run her eyes over the contract. The reasons for refusal immediately evaporated somewhere, because the conditions were so good that it would be foolish to refuse. Coughing into her palm before notifying everyone of her decision, Karuna accepts the job. Everything really suits her. The young man points with his hand to the place of the signature. Nothing more is required, just one stroke of the hand, and it's accepted. Grabbing the ink pen in her hand, the girl suddenly decides it's safer to write with her left hand. It'll help hide her real MO. The treaty passes into Ron's hands. He should assure everything because he is the owner and hires people. His eyes read. A second later, the sheet falls like a piece of paper on the table. The signature is correct, which means that Karuna has been hired. The frowning heroine doesn't understand why Buckeld is taking everything that's going on so seriously. He should really relax, as he's not. The headmaid beckoned the girl to follow. She is now an official employee of the castle and should be trained. The girl quickly agrees and gets up from her favored spot. The green-headed man wanted to ask what happened, but as he looked at the Duke, he remembered something. He has an appointment with an acquaintance of his today. The young man continues his chatter, trying to get through to his buddy, but he didn't seem to hear him at all. The only thought in his mind was of the strange damsel. Putting his hand to his chin in thought, the guy tries to put all the pieces of the puzzle together. The girl is a commoner, but then how does she know how to read? Handprint. It's always a sign that you're signing a contract with someone not of high society. They don't know how to write, so thoughts shift to Karuna. She wrote her own name, thus bringing the man to a standstill. It's almost unrealistic. The girl was writing with her left hand, trying to hide something for some reason. Perhaps she didn't want to show her real handwriting, but then what was the point? The beauty is indeed very cute and looks very young, but, collating the facts, the Duke was not sure of anything. She didn't look like a 12-year-old girl. The thought process is cut short. Bakel talks about how glad he is that this girl is not his soulmate. That was the only upside. The excitement didn't stop. There was no odor emanating from her hair, nor from the heroine herself in general. A lot of things didn't add up and didn't feel like reality. How similar she was. The man kept seeming to find more similar. Karuna sits on the floor, dressed in her maid's uniform, deep in her thoughts. An unexpected cheer is heard from outside. Two cute girls who, judging by their appearance, also work here, in a split second are already squatting in front of her, starting their questioning. They wondered where she... Making a grimace of pain, the villainess talks about how much it pains her to even remember it. Making a grimace of pain, the villainess talks about how much it pains her to even remember it. There was some truth to that after everything that had happened at Count Macarina's. The pink-haired woman quickly hugs the main character. Outrages about why they are all harassing the girl continue to pour in a stream of words. She'd just forgotten all the horror. Trying to free herself from the iron grip, Karuna collapsed. The unknown person pressed her even tighter against. An unknown girl appeared right in front of the protagonist's eyes. The most unpleasant thing is to have a person's cheeks coddled without their permission. Finally left without any unnecessary attention, the girl only rubs her cheeks red from being touched with her palms. To her ears comes a conversation about the Duke and a prominent lady who has invited her. The maid continues her story by recalling the day one of the tea ceremonies took place. Even back then, the Duke himself was as excited as ever. His entire body seemed to be electrified, and it was noticeable to absolutely everyone. Rumors spread by themselves. Some people had already in their heads married them long ago, and the couple actually looked quite cute. Without giving much thought to what is happening, Karuna, as if nothing happened, brings the cookies to her mouth. Backeld isn't cold, but it feels like he is. The two maids continue their conversation. Another word about the young man flies past his ears. It is said that this time he went to the Lady Laurent of the Viscount's family. Memories came flooding back on their own. The main character knew this girl very well back when she was Klain. It seemed that the girl had always wanted to lure Ron away. Embarrassment and disgust always encompassed the girl after all the words of the interlocutor. She's not all, won't settle down, continuing to hope that she'll be able to melt the ice and get the guy for herself. The cookies melt in the girl's mouth as she is brought back to reality. The only interesting news is that the couple will be having tea at the castle today. Rising from her knees and shaking off the crumbs, the girl decided it was time to get to work. Apologizing for leaving early, she hurriedly moves from her seat. Karuna opens the oak door that leads to the courtyard. The beautiful chambers of the castle glisten in the sun. You can admire them forever, but the girl is interested in completely different things. Turning her head, the protagonist notices barrels of wine lined up in a neat stack. That's what she needed. A picture of the very wolf that turned out to be Duke reluctantly. Right in front of the girl stands the head of the maids. The young lady did not immediately notice the older woman and was therefore a bit Before I could ask anything, screams come from somewhere. Mr. Ron is returning, and that's why everyone has been ordered to get out of the way. One of the clan of the forest, driving a horse, continues to shout. The woman at the tea party did slip something into the young man's tea, and he is now in the carriage in a most terrible condition. Some servants voice their displeasure at the situation. Everyone fears that the man will start having seizures again, but the good thing is that he's already here, which means he's getting help. A realization comes to the heroine's little head. She knows who the Duke had tea with, so she's in shock. Lady Lurentov was not up to the task. That was her goal, but the girl couldn't believe anyone could do that, even though not fulfilling everything in the best way. The only sane thought was the love potion. The girl thought that maybe Bakeld had just drunk a love potion. The love potion is popular among many noblewomen. You can't buy it, but sometimes it becomes available. It's only worth adding a few drops for the effect you want. It doesn't matter where you put the potion because it will still work. Once a person tastes the love potion, they will immediately fall in love. Knowing this lady, she could definitely go for that. Her love was more like an obsession. Irritably exhaling air, Karuna remarked to herself how naive Ron was after all. It wasn't clear how anyone could buy into that kind of thing. Already hurrying towards the castle, the girl still couldn't understand how this had happened. You don't have to drink everything you're given, and you don't have to drink it in someone else's place. More and more strange thoughts swarmed in his head. The young lady noticed something on the floor with the edge of her eye. Reaching for the wooden handle, the heroine decided to pick up an obscure object. Without even holding it, you could tell how hard it was going to be. Now the girl looked more like a little warrior. In his hands was none other than an axe. Self-defense was paramount. At this time, the carriage was already on the doorstep. You had to be careful not to accidentally run over a person. Mr. Ron has finally arrived. The carriage door slowly opens. Everyone knows who is there, but what a state he was in. The Duke was clearly angry. A grimace distorted the young man's face, instilling fear in everyone around him. His fist slammed against the door, thus opening it. Pupils shrunk. It served no good to those around him, nor did it serve Bakerd himself. Her mind was clouded, and it was noticeable to leaning his hand on the inside of the handle, the young man clutched his head, making inhuman sounds. He clearly needed help. You could tell by the way he was suffering. One of the descendants of the clan of the forest is instantly by his buddy's side. Trying to calm the man down, he can't understand what's happened, but it seems to be getting worse. All requests denied, he seemed to have almost lost his hearing. Ron didn't want to go to his chambers or do anything else. The interlocutor is rudely punched in the face. His pleas have clearly not been heard, and that's why confusion sets in. Without expecting it, the young man flies a few meters away. The power of the wolf is starting to show, which is why that's how it happened. The slight grin and the veins in his neck are what characterize Bakeld at this moment. The red eyes are full of anger and vindictiveness. The Duke turned his head and noticed a stack of barrels. Right behind them was the main character, who panicked as soon as it happened. Cold terror is all that is felt at the moment. She's been discovered, and it's very, very bad. The shelter wasn't secure enough. The young man leisurely turns his head to the side. With slow steps, he begins to advance toward that very spot. Gripping the axe's hilt harder, the heroine mentally thinks of the consequences of his attack if he does intend to harm her. My hands are almost unable to hold a weapon anymore. She has no choice but to leave marks on her hands. The squeak of shoes suggested that Duke was already very close to her. The thought of attack, the belligerently raised top 0R indicates complete determination on the part of the girl. She realized it was the only way out in this situation. It happened once before. The ropes are cut, and the barrels are rapidly falling one by one as if in slow motion. The Duke darted his eyes around, realizing exactly what was about to hit him. The barrels were displayed in his small pupils. Coming closer and closer, it seemed as if the object would literally slam into the young man on impact. It wasn't what he wanted to get at all. Someone's hand sticks out from under the barrels. Standing only dozens of centimeters away, the girl doesn't dare move. Smiling victoriously, Karuna settled the axe easily on her shoulder. There was no limit to her joy. Ron got what he deserved. The young man was pulled from under the rubble. The two Forest Clan natives gently threw the Duke's arms onto their shoulders. He looked visibly shabby, but he still had the power to shout. The castle shook with women's screams and squeals. The voice is familiar, and again the screams announced their rejection. Karuna wrinkled her nose. Fatigue just kept piling up on all sides. Screaming takes a lot of energy, and that's not always a good thing, but the special didn't have a way out. The head maid covers her eyes, ignoring the girl's words. Her main argument is that the young lady will be paid more. The weekly pay did promise to be double what it is now. Making a disappointed grimace, Karuna says with disappointment in her voice that apparently this is what she was expected to hear, but it is not the truth. Ron and the maid look at the interlocutor in silence. She just keeps screaming about how she won't and can't do it, gesticulating her hands furiously. The girl is only 12 years old, and so she can't work for this man. Not with him. That's just not going to happen. Extending her finger forward, trying to point in the man's direction, she frowns even more. Bending over to be the same height as the girl, he kept debating about what was going on. He wasn't attracted to anyone, but even if there weren't any women left, the young man still wouldn't even look in the direction of the maid. For a beauty, it wasn't an obvious indicator. He's already having thoughts about it, and that tells her something. Ron, in a state of anger, recoiled to the side. The head maid stands without giving any sign so as not to interrupt their interesting conversation. Tired of this altercation, an elderly woman makes attempts to stop the couple. The answer turns out to be pretty angry. Both are only yelling something different. Walking down the hallway, the girl notices how everyone is looking at her strangely. She had unpleasant sensations envelop the heroine. Why is this all happening to her? Literally running down the stairs to the bottom of the stairs, the long, tormented maiden's question comes off her lips. The maids only look at her and wonder how she doesn't know what's going on yet. The eyes instantly shrink, becoming like small grains. It turns out that among the knights she is now known as none other than Rana Bakal. The conversationalists smile back sweetly as they continue their story. The Duke decided to give her a knighthood after the girl managed to stop him twice. Standing frozen as if dumbfounded, Karuna doesn't realize what's happening. Someone from the clan of the forest should tell everyone more about this later. Just think of the leader, and he's here. Like a puppy dog, he pleads with the girl that she should consider the title of knight. It won't be difficult, but great for her career. Turning her head away, Karuna tries to stand her ground. She won't and can't. That's her favorite and real answer. The girl's about to leave. Greenhead, however, won't leave her alone. There is some truth in what he says. Being a knight would indeed be much easier and more interesting than being a servant. The answer remains the same. The young lady continues to throw around rejections. The young man is already in despair. It is not at all clear. Putting your gaze down, it's hard not to think through all of your decisions. Becoming a knight would be much better, but she'd still have to say no until they got rid of her. The girl was sure she'd be fine, but she really couldn't agree. It's a shame, that's all. Ready to kneel down, the man wanted to say something else, but rudely cutting him off with the fact that she should go, Karuna quickly removes herself. It's better this way. The yard looks decidedly different. There aren't many differences here, but one and the most important of them all is the means of defense, in the form of guns strung almost everywhere you can. Axes are now part of the life of the palace. There are really a lot of them. It's hard to do the math. All this wonder looks out the window right at Duke. The young man is in a state of confusion and horror as to what this is all about. Meanwhile, as a clan forest descendant moves around busily at his back, talking about security and how much it cost him to put it all up, the irritation had reached its limit and now seemed to be pouring over the edge of the well. The man ordered everything cleaned up. He clearly wasn't happy with everything that was going on. With no time to find the right answer, the head maid steps in to defend the outlier. The arguments are true. The beauty of the facade is not so important to recovery. The Duke was about to start his line to say something and try to counter, but something caught his attention. Her head turned reluctantly toward the window. The interlocutors froze in silence, only glancing at each other. Bakeld mused absently about Karuna. A smile stretched across her lips and lit up her entire face. He was clearly up to something, and no one was in a position to predict exactly what it was. Narrowing his eyes and folding his arms across his chest, Ron thought only of how long the girl would last in the manor. By his reckoning, it won't last long. A small figure is heading somewhere. The girl doesn't even realize that at this very moment, she is being watched. The next day was going to be challenging. From the morning, one of the maids approaches the maiden and congratulates her on her acquired title. Not knowing what to say, the lady only manages to mumble something like a thank you in response. Walking leisurely down the hallway, a beautiful woman carries a basin of water. She doesn't want to believe everything that's going on, but she hopes that at least the care of the elite will be easier. The people are indeed very kind, and perhaps it's all because most of them were raised in the clan of the forest. A difficult question, but the pondering has to be interrupted by standing right in front of the door to the Duke's chambers. Opening the door, Karuna enters without knocking, apologizing before doing so. That's her direct responsibility now. Walking over to the nightstand, the girl notices the guy still lying on the bed. It seems the one hasn't woken up yet and is having 10 dreams. Trying to wake up Baker doesn't end well. The girl pulls at the edge of the blanket, saying something, but only times louder. Nothing happens, and it's kind of confusing. Running out of patience, Karuna yanks the blanket so that it flies off the bed. It was one of the surest ways to wake a person up. Shock is sharply displayed on the heroine's face. The pink hue goes from the cheeks to the ears. An amazing thing, but one she certainly didn't expect to see. Screams burst from her mouth. She really hadn't expected to see such a strange sight. It felt so lousy it's hard to put into words. The guy slept in just his shirt. He was peacefully sleeping, not realizing that right now he was being scrutinized with a surprised look. Karuna could only continue her outrage at his appearance. Clasping her hands with the sheet to herself, the girl is still in turmoil. She had become his personal maid, but what was she to do now? If the man continues to walk around like this, she will definitely not be well. She's obligated to work with him, but there's no opportunity for that yet. The guy was handsome, and that really doesn't help. If he's going to keep this up, the girl just won't have the strength to fight him. But she had one way to do it now, and that was to walk over to the basin. The icy waterfall poured over the young man in an instant. Screams filled the entire room and beyond. Sitting on the bed with an angry expression on his face, the gentleman didn't realize what had just happened. Someone unceremoniously doused him with a basin, thus waking him up. Her hand went up to her chin, trying to wipe away all the moisture that had accumulated on Ron. It seemed that he was ready to sizzle everyone around him with his stern gaze. The little girl belligerently held the iron thing as self-defense. The small eyes did not betray any consternation. The title of Duke should have said something, but the heroine didn't seem to care at all. She didn't answer the question posed, but the time had come. Somehow, the girl always had a good argument. The assignment was to wake Ron up, she said, and she accomplished that in the best way possible. Carefully placing the basin back on the nightstand, Karuna pokes at the gentleman, saying that if he has any complaints, he should change his maid. The girl folds her arms across her chest in a victory gesture, knowing she won't be caught. I can't believe she had the guts to pull this off. Fixing his hair, the young man only wondered if the young lady really wasn't afraid of him. It was hard to believe it was true, but it was. The response was a sneer. Stacking her arms to her sides, the protagonist grinned, not realizing what she had to fear. Already an orderly, irritated outlier almost shouted about how he wasn't a seducer, and it was all nonsense. There was no reason to talk about him that way at all. The damsel averted her gaze. He definitely should have looked at his appearance and only then draw conclusions. That's what she pointed out to him, almost like a finger. Surprise showed on the young man's face. It seemed as if his eyes were almost flying to his forehead for no good reason. He definitely should have changed his clothes, something he recognized thanks to the girl. The young man silently adjusts his scarlet tie. His face doesn't convey any emotion, but what happened is still standing in his head without any movement. Karuna is looking somewhere off to the side, but the young Duke can't help but pay attention. She notices the way he looks at the girl, and she has a lot of questions. Confusion, that's all. Beghild doesn't understand how she can be so young. Obviously, something doesn't add up here, but instead of figuring things out, the guy just suggests we go to the lunchroom. A beautifully decorated table laden with heaps of dishes beckon to try each one. The headmaid, bowing her head, invites Ron. Already on her way to the elderly lady, the maiden notices that the table is indeed bursting with potions, which is even surprising. The Duke stands by the table. It seemed like he was about to start breakfast, but the guy stands silently for a minute. He dines alone. Then why is there so much food here? His head slowly bowed, the pondering long over. Something has to happen right now. In the next second, Ron is already standing on the table. My eyes felt like they were trying to pop out of my forehead at this. Why did he act like that out of the blue? The young man is in an apparent inhuman rage. Food enters his mouth with the help of his hands. Cutlery is forgotten, so he just eats that way. Tomorrow continued. The elderly woman is not paying attention at all to everything going on, only smiling sweetly. Karuna, on the other hand, is still in the most terrible shock. The realization comes by itself. He never eats anything at banquets, and now the girl seemed to have found a logical explanation for it. A man would scare away everyone around him. Groaning, the girl tries to distract herself from the spectacle, if only for a second, turning to the person next to her. Saying how good it is that it's all being kept secret, she tries to remain calm. The young man had already finished his breakfast. You could tell by the look on his face that everything was delicious, even though he behaved that way. Licking his fingers, the guy kept looking somewhere off to the side. The girl felt sick to her stomach. Closing her eyes, she continues to ponder how she witnessed such an incident after all. Horror displayed on her face. How can a man in the prime of his life behave like this? It's very strange and at the very least unpleasant. This is not the first time Ron has behaved inappropriately. Every time she goes into his room before going to bed, the young lady sees him lighting candles and then staying awake because of them. You have an important meeting. Nothing will help. The Duke will sleep until noon, even if you use every possible method. Backled is a war hero, a bloody knight, the head of the imperial nobles, always so calculating and cold, but it turned out to be the opposite. The protagonist sometimes feels like he's just plain out of his mind. Even the fact that the guy is peeling fruit with a sword is proof of that. A warlike fire ignites in the girl's heart. She promises herself she's not going to let it go. She owes it to him to make him a normal person and not compromise on any principles. It's early morning. The sun is shining brightly, encouraging everyone around us to wake up and enjoy the weather. Screams dilute all this beauty. Wearing only his pants, the young man runs away from the girl running behind him. The screams belong to him. The maiden holds up her shirt. The goal has been set, and she has no intention of backing down. Managing to turn his head as he walks, Duke only continues to shout. He wants the hated heroine to finally get off his back and out of his sight. The young lady isn't even going to stop halfway. She wants the man to wear a shirt. It's not hard, but he'll have to do it. The only argument for not wearing clothes is that the young man's back would burn again. The thing is a joke, but the person running behind him talks about sprinkling pepper powder on his clothes. The response is another shouting match. People from the castle start showing up along the way. Everyone is busy doing their own thing, but seeing this picture, everyone starts to slowly back away in different directions. Asking for help doesn't work. One of the servants only chuckles, while one of the maids smilingly invites Karuna to come in for tea and cookies she has prepared. Everyone seemed eager to do something good, but not for Ron, but for the girl. A moment of silence and a grimace of understanding loomed on the young man's face. He says something after them, mentally hating them. The clan chief of the forest clan, passing by the window, seeing this picture, smiles. It's hard not to find upside in what's going on, and that's why he does. The maid standing nearby only confirms how cute it is. The smiles are hard to hide because both are genuinely happy. Taking the mug of tea in his hands, the green-headed man agrees, speaking of his lack of attacks. There was some truth to that, because it was true that the seizures had gone away with the girl's appearance. Outside, the girl was about to catch up with the man, still trying to throw a shirt over him. The condition was getting better day by day, and that boded well for many things. The elderly lady kept smiling, saying thank you to the girl. Everything was clear enough in her mind. It was all thanks to this child. Taking a slight break from his tea, the outlier opens his eyes to return to watching the two individuals on the street. Various remarks are still coming out. Thoughts carry over to Karuna. Sweet girl, always ready to come to the rescue, and her stubbornness can be envied by everyone. She is not the Duke's own daughter, but remembering how the clan of the forest presented her, anything could be. At least she deserves it more than anyone else. Something metallic appears in front of my eyes. Surprise loomed on the green-haired man's face. Now he couldn't watch everything that was going on, and that worried him. Raising his head, he noticed Mistress Lime. The metal object was nothing but a tray. The elderly lady held it silently while the man talks about how he didn't expect her to do that. The serious facial features make it clear that the woman is talking quite seriously. She believes the child belongs to the Lord, which is why the chief shouldn't stare like that for no good reason. A nervous smile spreads across the guy's face. He wasn't staring at the girl at all. He didn't even have it in his mind. But it seems that he was too much in his own thoughts at the time that he forgot any rules of etiquette. I mean, he never even said his name. Karuna waved her arms wildly and yelled at Duke. She wasn't running anywhere else, but it seemed like the situation had only gotten worse. He was acting like a child, and it wasn't appropriate. With her arms at her sides, the girl only continued to lament. It seemed that the Duke enjoyed bullying the poor maid so much, and that was why he was doing this to her. There was no normal reply, but Ryan, lying on a tree branch, was audibly rejoicing at the fact that he could finally not see the face of his interlocutor. He didn't care at all about what was going on. The lady wasn't going to just give up. The entreaties and threats almost worked, but she was far below, so it was no use. Bakeld was supposed to meet a noble lady today, but he vehemently refused to give up his shirt. The guy was really acting like a little kid. It didn't take long for him to agree, but he would directly refuse to wear the clothes Karuna chose. She was his servant, and he was obligated to go along with her choices, but so far it had been quite the opposite. An interesting thought popped into the girl's head. She could still climb up to him if he was so reluctant to come down. The only thing left to do is to enforce that action. The cocky expression on his face made it clear that all words were taken as a joke. Ron didn't believe she would climb the tree, so he openly mocked the young woman. He is now the king of the position and can say anything he wants. The gardener pulled up the ladder. The Duke's shrieks echoed throughout the garden again, for how dare the man do such a thing? Mustache is a gentleman after all. Hence he had no qualms about helping the girl get in as well. Not a few seconds later, the young hero sees the face of the hated servant right in front of his nose. Leaves have crumbled on her head, but she, without even trying to shake them off, only glares angrily at the young man. The shirt flies into the young man's face. He really should put it on if he doesn't want to get himself in trouble. The face distorts because of an unexpected event. Waving the thing around, the girl continues to talk about how the man should come down. Her words sound more like an order by now, which isn't surprising. Apparently, the girl has overdone the amplitude of the swing, and her feet slide downward, aching to pull her mistress with her. She doesn't have time to fully react because of the quickness of the action. Bakeld lifts himself up, sitting down on the branches of the tree, realizing that something not good is definitely about to happen. The ladder, swinging dangerously, hints and alerts you to the threat. Karuna swiftly flies down. The ladder has broken away from its support and is heading to the same place. Her face shows nothing but unconcealed horror. If the girl falls, she's in trouble. The anticipation of falling so close and so far away. There may be a fracture or even several. All the events flash before the maiden's eyes, and she wonders why she climbed that tree. The little lady clutches the shirt in her hands as an object of salvation. The fall should have happened by now, but then why didn't she fall? It's too soft and doesn't hurt at all. The cause of the minor incident was identified almost immediately. Opening her eyes, Karuna saw Duke's face just a meter away from her. He held the girl in his arms, talking about how much she scared him. The cause of the minor incident was identified almost immediately. Opening her eyes, Karuna saw Duke's face just a meter away from her. He held the girl in his arms, talking about how much she scared him. The guy keeps asking about why it's so light. The girl is given quite a bit of food so that she has the energy for everything, but this question remains a mystery. The main character only darted her eyes, realizing the whole situation. Lowering her gaze, as if the calm before the storm, the maiden quietly asks for something. Because of the tone of her voice, Bakeld doesn't immediately realize what she wants. A palm promptly imprinted itself into the young man's cheek. The interviewee is yelling to be let go. Maybe she's really uncomfortable in his arms. The heroine was struggling to free herself from the iron grip, but she had little success so far. How she wished this would all be over, but falling was not an option. Feet make contact with the ground. She's finally been released and is free, which can't be a bad thing. Freedom has come, but the girl casually lowers her eyes to her uniform. Because of the tree climbing, the whole uniform was now unequivocally dirty. We should take it to the laundromat. Duke turns his head toward Karuna. The strange feeling is not about to leave the young man. There's something interesting and mesmerizing about this little thing after all. If only Beckeld had the will, he could do anything to destroy the maiden in no time. She was small and frail, but very combative. A lot of unacceptable things happened in a month. On the first day, the girl doused him with water from a basin to wake him up early. It would have been okay, but after that incident, she repeated this method 1,000,000 more times. His hands were always bandaged now, so that the young man's fingers were almost immobile, and he had to use appliances, refusing to eat with his hands. A wave of anger came over Ron. He didn't understand what the problem was or why the heroine was doing this to him. What does she want? Approaching the blonde, the guy places his hand on top of her small head. Questions about why she is not afraid of him are never answered. She has nothing to fear. She's fearless, but she can't let a moment of teasing slip by. The worst thing in this world is just his table manners. She has nothing to fear. She's fearless, but she can't let a moment of teasing slip by. The worst thing in this world is just his table manners. Ron stares at her intently, but he doesn't seem to see anyone around him. The maiden begs to be released, but everything passes his ears. Immersion in thought cannot be avoided. Wrapped in weightless space, the man remembered Lady Clane. He didn't want to believe anything, but what if his hunch was true after all, and this girl had been sent by an acquaintance of his? Last night was very important. Incomprehensible envelopes that had no end and no edge lay on the table. No one was going to touch the stack of paper. Beckeld holds up a piece of paper in his hands. It couldn't be said that he was extracting a lot of useful information, but at least a little bit of new information had entered his mind. The scroll said that Karuna's parents had gone missing, and she was found all alone, wandering the streets. Someone obviously wanted to hide the truth because it was all too suspicious. The parents left the young lady immediately after the divorce, or someone forced them to. Her hand rises on its own, touching her smooth chin. Ron really wanted to make sense of the whole situation. One of the first things he was interested in was finding out whose territory the girl had been living on all this time. There is a royal aid station in the castle. On the first day, that's exactly where Karuna found herself. Sitting on the couch, she was supposed to answer all the questions asked of her, but there was no record of it anywhere. Still, sometimes these procedures are skipped. There was an incident on the same day, and too many people came in. All attention was diverted to one elderly woman, and the young lady was forgotten to be interviewed. Fury covers the boy's face. He doesn't understand how the people at the help center can be so frivolous. The crown should still be on his side, but this time seems to be the exception. He was unlucky. The entire kingdom was extremely lucky that the red-haired lady and Count Macarena were not interested in an assassination attempt on the prince. The lady's character was extremely complicated, and so she could easily send her man to ruin everyone's life. Thoughts like a swarm of wild bees swarmed in the Duke's clever head. His theories could very well be reality, but he didn't know how to test it. Suddenly, an epiphany seemed to descend upon the young man. What if Count Macarena's daughter just wanted to hide someone in his chambers? He had long known that his castle was safe because of Clan Forest, but such an idea had never even crossed his mind before. Only one thing was clear so far. Karuna is an unusual child. She was clearly plotting or preparing for something. Anything was to be expected. There was some squealing. That's what kicked it into reality. The girl was screaming about how much pain she was in. It was obvious that, distracted by his own thoughts, Ron squeezed her head harder than he should have. Fear gripped the boy. Whatever and whoever this girl was, he wasn't going to intentionally hurt her. Panic was displayed in the young man's eyes, and the best solution was to hastily loosen his grip. Pulling her hand away, apologies poured in toward the maiden. The Duke didn't complain about all that. That was why he never felt the need to apologize. But here he had made a mistake, and he should have admitted it. The pain was incredibly intense. Karuna, putting her hands to her head, looks resentfully at her interlocutor. His words do nothing to help her, so she silently turns her head away. Control is lost, which means it was a big miss. The best solution was to change the subject. Turning to the lady, the man asked her about her relatives. He heard that the girl didn't have time to say goodbye to anyone. They really should have walked around the capital. The beauty's face lit up with a joyful glow. She had wanted to go to the city for a long time yet, for she missed her aunt and uncle and the acquaintances of their inn. Not believing his ears, the strength was only enough to question whether what was said was true. A smile spread across his face. The terms and conditions are pretty straightforward. She was allowed to go, but only with a chaperone. This task was quite doable. Joy swept over the young lady at the same second. Oak doors to the study separated the hallway from the room. 2 pairs of feet were heading toward the room, shoes clinking and squeaking. The Duke wanted to be rid of the company of this wee one, if only for a while and for 1 hour before their trip. Ordering Karuna to wait for him at the gate, he hides in the study, to which the girl nods in agreement.